Hello and welcome to Artificial Intelligence, or AI Basics. I'm Brandon, a librarian with the Information and Research Services Department, and this program was created by myself, my colleagues Dan and Isabella. Before we begin, I want to take a minute to invite you to turn on captioning by clicking the CC icon on the bottom right of this video. Additional closed captioning settings, including translations, can be found by clicking the gear icon. Alright, let's get started. In this program, we're going to be talking about AI, which, as you're probably aware of, is a pretty big topic and has been all over the news for the last 2 years. Specifically, talking about generative AI, things like ChatGPT. So, for this program, we're going to work on defining some key terms around artificial intelligence, looking at some free and reliable resources that you can use, understanding the benefits, but also the limitations of these tools, do's and don'ts, and learn how these tools can be helpful as well as practice creating some prompts, or at least following along while I kind of walk you through how these chatbots and things like ChatGPT, Copilot can work. When I teach this class in person, I usually ask everyone to raise their hand, or if you're online, type in chat. But I guess in this case, kind of create a mental note if you've used any of these services before. Things like digital assistants, facial recognition software, a smart home device, seen suggested items for online shopping or advertisements, or use social media like Facebook, X, Instagram, or TikTok. In the broadest sense, anyone who has used any of these technologies has already used and had AI assistants in some form. I'll talk a little bit more about this throughout the presentation, but I just wanted to highlight that while what's called generative AI, like ChatGPT, has been making headlines since its release a couple of years ago, AI and machine learning technology has been around for decades and has been utilized in many modern technological devices and software. To clear up some terms, let's first look at what artificial intelligence actually means. We define it as the ability of a computer to perform tasks associated with intelligent beings. As you can see, this definition is rather broad, which is why there's often a lot of confusion around the term AI. In fact, a more correct term, and one that academics are pushing for, might be augmented intelligence, since these programs are assisting humans with tasks, not self-aware or machines gaining a kind of sentience like you see in science fiction films and literature. Now, the reason that artificial intelligence, and as we'll get into in a moment, machine learning, has been pursued is because at their basis, computers aren't really smart. To code a computer to do something, you have to give it so much information. If even a single variable or a part of the coding language is wrong, it just simply won't work. So early coding meant that you had to define everything, had to let the computer know what all the outcomes could be. And it takes a lot of work. And while computers are amazingly fast and can interpret data, they're wonderful for mathematics, it meant that when you were trying to do something more complicated or needed a program that could evolve over time or could work with something that you hadn't already kind of previously established to work the same way our brains do, uh, they needed to figure out a different way to code, a different way to teach these programs, these machines, in a sense. And that's where you get what's called machine learning, which is a branch of AI that focuses on the use of data and algorithms to imitate the way that humans learn. The reason we want to replicate humans thinking and learning is because our brains are actually quite advanced and really amazing. They're always making calculations, even if you aren't aware of it. For example, if you're at a crosswalk, wanting to cross the street, brain is working with a lot of data to determine if it's safe. You'll look to see if cars are coming in either direction, how fast they might be approaching, is the light about to turn, is there a crosswalk signal, how long might it take you to cross the street. These could all be seen as different points of data you're interpreting to determine the simple question of, can I walk yet? Is it safe to walk? While relatively simple for our brain, creating a computer program that could tell you the same thing would require an immense amount of work and engineering. That's what's led to machine learning and to the artificial intelligence programs like ChatGPT that we have today. Now, generative AI is what we'll spend most of this class talking about, but I want to showcase another type of AI, which is called discriminative AI. What this does is it separates data points into different classes, often used for supervised machine learning. But you see this in image or speech recognition, and perhaps the best example is your email. In the background, Gmail determines if email is spam or not spam, and this is supported by discriminative AI models. A researcher or a computer scientist hasn't, coded Gmail to know any type of email that it could possibly come across, but instead it's kind of taught in a way to recognize traits of spam emails. This can be from learning your own personal traits. So what you put in spam, it might try to find a connection between all the emails that you've put in that spam box so that it can learn this is what you consider spam. And there might be some tags or things that Google has created. Maybe it's um, a way that the email of the sender looks, certain characteristics. Maybe it's certain language that's often getting used, or an email that tries to add an image to it. Whatever might be flagging it as spam, elements of that might have been programmed in. But ultimately, the machine can adapt, can learn patterns, and can hopefully put the right emails in spam and the right ones in not spam. Although, if you're aware, this doesn't always happen the way you might think it will. But you have a little bit more of an understanding of how we kind of got to AI, or why we'd want these more advanced programs with machine learning, with AI capabilities. Let's discuss some common applications of AI in today's world. And I mentioned earlier with that hand raised activity, it really can be found almost anywhere. Sometimes it's very apparent, like in this Google search, where it says AI powered buying guides, or you might notice since ChatGPT and generative AI have kind of taken the world by storm, you're seeing it much more kind of out in the open. So if you do a Google search now, you'll get AI summary as like the top result. Meta has included AI searches in their features. You're seeing AI image generation appear in programs like Canva. So a lot of companies are being much more open about where AI is being utilized, jumping on this big news cycle and interest in AI that got started from ChatGPT. But behind the scenes, AI has been adding functionality to programs for quite a while now. I already mentioned search functions like Google, YouTube, social media. Um, all those are being assisted by machine learning and AI. Suggested items, so targeted ads, or use sections on websites, things that learn based on your habits online, all are supported through AI, as well as design suggestions and things like Canva or Microsoft PowerPoint. In the definitions, we covered discriminative AI, determining if something is this or that, which is a little bit of a simplification, but it's basically what's going on. So things like Face ID on your phone work that same way. It captures the image of your face, turns it into data, and then each time you go to unlock it, it's determining is this the same face that was programmed in, or is this another face? And then virtual assistants like Siri, Alexa, or Alexa Plus. It's kind of a newer version. So while AI has been everywhere and for quite a while, really in the 2010s is when you start to see AI being incorporated into algorithms like Google search results, social media more and more heavily. What's really taken the world by storm recently is generative AI. It's kind of the star of the show and what we'll be focusing on primarily for the rest of this program. Now, generative AI is a type of AI, same way that discriminative AI has its own kind of specialized process. Generative AI is an artificial intelligence designed to process prompts from users. So things you type into a chat box is often how you are able to give a generative AI program its prompt. And then that program will respond with text, images, audio, or some other output. But it's generating something new, which is where the generative AI component comes from. Things like ChatGPT, although they can now make images, started as what's called a large language model, meaning that was trained on an immense amount of written text. the books, the blogs, newspapers, anything that companies like OpenAI could easily pull digitally. So really large swaths of the internet were utilized to help train these programs so that they could respond and create text. And in this next slide, we'll dive into a little bit more, what's working behind the scenes with these, how it creates those texts. To get a better understanding of how generative AI works, we're going to start with a little exercise. So take this phrase, or these two words, once upon. What would be the next word that you'd add? What's the first thing that comes to mind? You might say the letter A. That's what comes naturally to me. Now, what would the next word be? How would you fill in this blank space? Well, I gravitate to the word time. So now we have once upon a time. Makes sense. It's a pretty common phrase. However, maybe you're a huge fan of Edgar Allan Poe. Then you might instead fill in these blanks with midnight and then dreary. Once upon a midnight dreary, which is the opening to Poe's famous poem, The Raven. Now, how you answer depends on what you've read, the media that you've consumed, and that's why this little exercise is a good example of how generative AI works. Programs such as Gemini and ChatGPT have been trained on an immense amount of text. So when they generate a response, they're calculating what the next most likely word would be, and so on and so forth. The Once Upon a Time example does a really good job in showcasing how generative AI is functionally going word by word, choosing which is the best one after another until it creates full sentences and full paragraphs and so on. But I also like this example here, which contextualizes a little bit more the statistical nature of what's occurring. So here you have an example of where AI might be constructing the sentence. The best thing about AI is its ability to, is now on this last word. Could be learn, predict, make, understand, or do, as well as a list of countless other examples. But maybe these are the highest statistical, or statistically the most likely word based on what it's read and what it's learned. In this case, it says that learn is 4.5% most likely, so perhaps that is what it would go with. But it shows that based on its training, on the sources from books, newspapers, articles, and so on, that's what it's using to construct these percentages, the statistics behind its choices. It's important to keep that in mind, especially as we talk about inherent biases later, which, like humans, in a sense, what it's been taught, the text that it's been basically fed, are where it draws from. And so if there's biases inherent in those, that'll kind of lead it over into the results, into the answers that it returns when you go to prompt. And that's really important. And honestly is one of the concerns that since we aren't always aware of where it's pulling its answers from and how it's deciding, we know it's some sort of statistics going on in the background, but when you're not aware of where that source is coming from, it can lead to some problems. And it can make it more difficult to find out when it's hallucinating, which will be one of the concerns we talk about after I go into ChatGPT a little bit more. But I do like this. I think it's a helpful example to just get a better idea of kind of what's going on behind the scenes. It's not the sentient being. It really is just they kind of doing math. And this is how I can sometimes have a generic or almost bland nature to its writing because it's taking thousands, millions of words, sentences, and boiling them down to here are the the averages of the human language. And so creatively, it can be lacking. Now, maybe updates and different changes to the kind of programming can help update this, but definitely at the moment, when you see AI text, the same thing for images, it has this kind of boiled down nature to it. And that comes from just how it's operating. Before we really dive into ChatGPT and show you kind of how it works or how you can use it, I have these two, call them almost like asterisks slides, where um, just want to talk about some things to keep in the back of your mind before you use uh, really any AI or generative AI programs. And some of this has to do with just good online practices, like this privacy awareness slide. And the next one is about kind of environmental concerns with generative AI programs. There's a saying that if something is free, you're the product. And that's especially true with AI right now. While these services are fantastic tools, it's important to be mindful that the prompts you write are being used to make the program better and to help train it. The prompts that you enter can be accessed by the companies who have created these AI programs, which means that you should never input sensitive data. Things like your personal identifiable information, financial or banking information, password login credentials, private or confidential information, and proprietary or intellectual property. So if you're working on the next great novel, or you have this idea for an amazing invention that you want to get a patent on, I wouldn't upload those into ChatGPT. Just because, especially if you're using the free version, everything is being housed on OpenAI on the company's servers. So it means it is accessible by their employees, and it's being used to the train ChatGPT in some form or another. So there are ways to make using generative AI programs more private. Sometimes it's through using paid models. Sometimes that's the advantage or one of the selling points, that um, if you pay for like a premium edition, then the data isn't going to be used to train it, or it won't be accessible to be held on a private server. The other way is to run generative AI programs on your own laptop. So everything is done locally. So instead of basically using their servers and going through OpenAI, your machine's going to run it. However, that can be pretty taxing on a machine's processing power. So usually you need a really good graphics card, or a decently well-built computer to sometimes run AI generating things, especially if you're doing image or video work. Those are already pretty taxing when you're just kind of editing video, or when you're trying to create something with a program. But AI just makes that exponentially more taxing on the system. So you almost have to have a build set up for that. But for the text-based ones, those are a little easier to run. But if you're interested, that's something that there might be videos on LinkedIn Learning, certainly on YouTube or other video platforms, or tech blogs. You can learn how to run a generative AI program kind of locally. One nice thing about OpenAI, at least right now, it's a nonprofit, and they have made a lot of their stuff kind of accessible to the public, which is why one reason you've seen so many AI programs pop up very quickly. But so there are ways to make the use of generative AI more kind of private. Um, and this doesn't say that you can't use these things, but just be aware and practice safe um, uh, kind of online security habits whenever you're putting prompts in to these programs. The other concern I like to highlight is an environmental one. So no matter what you do, almost anything nowadays has some type of cost associated with it. But certainly so for anything using electricity. And really, electricity and water are the two main draws from generative AI. These statistics were taken from a wonderful presentation by the University of Pittsburgh Self-Science Library, so I want to make sure to give them a shout out for this. Um, but you can see that training GPT-3, which was the previous iteration of ChatGPT, generated an estimated 552 tons of CO2. And for water cooling, Microsoft has used 1.7 billion gallons of water in 2022, which is a 34% increase. Importantly, many tech companies have abandoned climate and carbon goals in order to pursue generative AI. What this means is that every time you put a prompt into Copilot or Gemini or ChatGPT, there's this environmental cost associated with it. And it's one that's currently higher than a Google search, quite significantly so. Again, like the privacy concerns, I don't want this to be like, oh, you can't use AI programming at all, it's destroying the planet. It's more to be aware that there is a cost associated with these tools, and especially if you're someone who's environmentally conscious, you want to make sure you're using kind of the best tool for your objective. So, for example, while ChatGPT could help you with mathematics, just not word problems. It's really bad with word problems. But if you ask ChatGPT what 2 plus 2 is, it would give you the answer, and hopefully the correct one. But a calculator would be able to do that calculation for so much less of an environmental impact. So that's where that using the right tool for the task is something that you might just want to keep in mind. That there's definitely things that AI can do that's unique and can be really helpful. But if there are other tools that do that thing, like a calculator for calculations, then you're definitely going to be, you know, saving electricity, saving water by turning to those kind of tried and tested tools rather than putting that through ChatGPT. Another just helpful kind of easy practice is not putting in prompts or like unnecessary prompts. I know OpenAI had recently come out stating that they were spending millions of dollars essentially in for people thinking or being overly polite for chat programs. So once, say you'd asked it for an itinerary, and it gave it planned the trip out for you. You could just end the conversation there. You've gotten kind of the result you wanted, but a lot of people were thanking the chatbot, which would then cause it to iterate or respond to that thanks. So again, not doing unnecessary prompts, turning to the best tools when those aren't generative AI programs are a good practice to help out a little bit since there is a cost associated with using these in electricity and water. With those privacy and environmental elements at the back of your mind, now we can finally dive into using generative AI program. Now, as I mentioned before, this will focus mostly on ChatGPT, but you could use Copilot, use Google's Gemini, Apple's AI, whichever is your preference. If you have one, um, any of these work functionally the same. As I'll show you later, it's nice to test out differences. Some might excel at one element versus another, but anything I talk about today in how to utilize it or some of the things you might be able to use it for would really carry over to enter these text-based generative AI programs. ChatGPT makes it very easy. You can go to chat.openai.com. Previously, you had to enter an email address and a phone number. Those might still be required to make an account to log in, which is beneficial if you want to save the history, basically, of your chats, which can be nice to come back to later, especially if you're working on something like an itinerary or a project where you might want to keep coming back. But you don't need an account. You can just go to their website. There's a chat box right there that you can just start typing away. Now, with the free models for these, slight differences between all of them, but usually you get so many uses a day. So especially for something that's more demanding, like image creation, you might only be able to create 4 images, and then it'll notify you that you'll need to come back another day to use it some more to create more images. But they're very upfront usually when you've hit that limit. As far as what ChatGPT actually is, or why it's called GPT, uh, that stands for a Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Essentially, it's a tool that you can use to type something in and get a response that's been generated by artificial intelligence and machine learning technology. Sometimes the responses are amazingly accurate, and sometimes they're not so great. And we'll get into the reasons behind that. As always, it's very helpful to keep in mind that you're talking to a computer and not a person. So it really depends a great deal on the quality of the initial prompt that you enter. And I'll cover this when I do kind of a demo here in a couple of slides, but uh, the more specifics you can give it, or even providing it with an example document, you'll get a much better kind of result in the end. All right. If you want, you're welcome to pause the video here for a moment, pull up ChatGPT, and kind of follow along. Similar to the last slide, you're welcome to pause the video here, especially if you've logged in or pulled up ChatGPT, and I recommend just try asking it some questions. See if you can find any limitations, if there's anything it doesn't really want to answer. I know previously, although it's improved slightly with this, trying to get a definitive answer, like who's the best hockey team, could be quite difficult. That's been updated slightly, but it really doesn't like to give almost like ultimatum answers or kind of opinionated answers. That's something it's been programmed to stray away from. So if you try to get it to pick just one, it'll say, for this year, this team won the Stanley Cup, which might indicate it was the best of that year, something like that. It tries to kind of get out of it. But yeah, so I recommend taking a couple minutes just to try out different questions, get a little familiar with it, and you can always start. I think one of the best ways with any chat program is just ask it what its best uses are or what it recommends, how to use it. However, if you want to explore ChatGPT at another time, that's fine as well. This next slide here is going to be a demo, a video of me showing how ChatGPT works, entering prompts, the benefits to have an account, and just kind of how it works in general, while showcasing how you can kind of iterate on a prompt, keep working with it to get something even more specific out of it. So we'll watch that demo and then we'll come back to the PowerPoint. Whether you're logged in or using ChatGPT without an account, both screens will look very similar and be centered on this text box here. This text box is how you'll ask ChatGPT questions, or give it what's called prompts. On the left here, you can see some additional options. This is particularly helpful if you are logged in. So you can see past chats, which I'll walk you through here in a moment, as well as a library of media that's created. So if you have it create images, all those images will be saved in the library. And that's really one of the biggest advantages to creating an account. It doesn't require having a plan or having one of those paid models. You're getting basically the same, or you are getting the same ChatGPT that you would get if you're using it completely free without an account, but it does save those past chats or those past images you've had it created. So that's one nice thing that, or a benefit for creating an account, is that all that stuff will be saved for later. But whenever you're ready to use it, and for those watching, you're welcome to follow along, but you can ask it whatever you'd like. So I know I had a couple of sample questions, but one of the most helpful kind of first interactions you could have, especially if you've never used generative AI before, is to simply ask, how can you help me? So once you enter the prompt, then you'll get a response here. So as you can see, it says, and breaks down to a couple different kind of specialties. So there's learning and research. So it can summarize articles, explain difficult concepts, generate ideas, can help with uh, brainstorming stories or song lyrics. Um, provide mandolin tabs. The reason it specifies mandolin tabs here, as I'll show you, is because I've asked it some questions in the past. Same thing for this recommend books. These are questions that I've asked it that it has remembered. So it kind of like logged those. So that's why it's bringing them back up here. Practical help, planning itineraries, like for the DC trip. You can see here, 3-day DC itinerary, and generate images. So this can be a good way to just get a quick overview of what it can do. So that's a nice first question to ask. Let's go over here to, this is a previous prompt. So it saved both the questions I've asked or the prompts that I've given it and its answers. So I can come back to this later. I could keep working on this. But so this is for this 3-day DC itinerary trip. So I start planning me a 3-day trip to Washington, D.C. towards the end of March. Give me some information about how the cherry blossoms will be in bloom, and then plans out my 3 days. Now for this trip, I've given it nothing. So this is purely going off of probably what it's been trained on. So information from the internet, what are kind of popular sites for 3-day trip. You know, if you've seen a bunch of, if I were to Google 3-day Washington D.C. itineraries, I'd probably see a lot of these same things, kind of those top 10 lists of what to do. Things like go to Georgetown, go to the National Air and Space Museum. But I've been to DC before. Maybe I want something a little more specific, a little more tailored to me. This is where what's called prompt engineering, which is this idea or kind of that there's a way to create better and better prompts that you can engineer the best possible prompts. And if you look at YouTube or things like LinkedIn Learning and type in prompt engineering tips or prompt tips, you'll find videos that can help you out with this as well. But a lot of it has to do with just getting more specific. The more specific you are, the better programs like these can help you and tailor the responses to what you're looking for. So now I've changed it or added to what my trip will be. I'll be staying in Roslyn. I will not have access to a vehicle. I'll have someone with me that's a vegetarian. I enjoy bookstores, record shops, want to eat at a ramen restaurant. I've been to the Library of Congress and most of the museums before, and can you update that with this in mind, as well as add a timetable and recommendations for public transit directions. So way more than that initial, I'm going to DC for 3 days in March. You can see this update saved memory. This means that it's going to kind of keep that in the back of its mind as it's generating these things. And for this chat thread, it'll be aware that I've added these stipulations to it. So now we're getting timetables instead of just day 1, do these activities. It's giving me a suggestion of eating at this coffee shop at 9 a.m., walking to Georgetown, how to get there, going across the Key Bridge, recommending Georgetown for shopping. Some of these recommendations are the same, but now it's giving more context. Philomena will have vegetarian options. I asked specifically for a ramen restaurant, which is given me. But let's say it's getting closer. But it gave me a ramen restaurant like every day. Too much ramen. So now I'm asking it to just one ramen restaurant, and that 3 days of bookstores and record shops is too many. So let's have 1 day away from shopping, and instead I want to do something that is touristy but feels more obscure, something off the beaten path. It's updated its memory again, and now it's added in this lesser known DC tourist experiences. Go see the stairs from the film The Exorcist. Go to the mansion on O Street, which is a really cool museum if you've never visited there. Very interesting. um, and dinner at the Red Hen. So it again, each time I'm asking it to change this itinerary with a bit more information, a bit more specifics, and it can alter that. And that's one of the best tips for using a program like this, whether it's Copilot or ChatGPT, is that by continuing to refine what you'd like from it and to work with it to kind of reach the best possible end result. In this case, this itinerary that's really tailored to what I would like. And the itinerary it gives me at the end here is really good and something that I've done some of these things before and would enjoy. So I think it's done a pretty good job here. Before we go back to the PowerPoint, I just wanted to showcase that it can do image generation as well. Very similar, the more specifics you give, whether that's the painting style, colors you'd want it to focus on, or just what's going to be in the image. So in this case, I said, since it's been so warm in PA lately, kind of dreaming of snow in winter, so it can generate an image of a cozy room with a fireplace and a large window that's looking outside at a beautiful scene of newly fallen snow. The location is somewhere in the mountains. And this is what it created. Pretty good. Like a lot of the AI generated art, it has a look to it. You can usually tell it's AI generated. It can look a little bland, but there are some uses. The opening slide with the dinosaur that was created using generative AI, asking for a prompt about a dinosaur in front of the Carnegie Library. So it can be helpful for creating a quick slide or flyer. Um, I've had friends who use it for creating images for a D&D campaign, something like that. So there are some uses for this as well. And I think you get 3 or 4 basically photos that can generate per day. It'll let you know basically what you've hit your max. And then you would either need to pay for a plan to get more images generated per day, or just wait until the next day. And that's how a lot of the free models work, is that you can use them a little bit, or use their best versions for a little bit, and then it might give you answers from a previous version that isn't quite as well trained, until some type of timer, maybe 24 hours, or so on. All right, we'll head back to the PowerPoint, but hopefully this was a good, quick kind of overview of what it looks like to use ChatGPT, and how you could get started yourself. Now that you've seen how a program like ChatGPT works, entering in prompts, the results can give, and hopefully have some ideas of how you may be able to use a program like that for yourself, it's important to cover some benefits and some limitations of these programs. First and foremost, probably one of the best benefits is the speed at which something like ChatGPT can generate results for you. The itinerary, although I had already entered in those prompts to make the process a little quicker, the results were written fairly quickly, less than a minute per prompt I was giving it. So over the course of those 3 prompt iterations, I planned out a 3-day trip to DC in less than 5 minutes. And I could have gone and looked at different blogs recommending restaurants or sites to check as I worked on creating my own itinerary. But finding those sources, finding that information, would have taken longer than going to ChatGPT. Now, in either case, I'm going to need to vet that information, make sure those restaurants are open during the times I want to go, double check their menus, just like I would if I found a recommendation to go to a restaurant from a blog. So kind of similar, but speed is definitely one of the main benefits. Summarizing sources is something it's very great at. So being able to put in an article or newspaper and get a quick summary. Helpful, that's something that a lot of academic databases are experimenting with, so that you can kind of quickly assess if this is an article that's going to be relevant to your research. Then you might read the entire thing for yourself to get the exact information, but you kind of skim that AI generated summary, as you keep moving from one article to another to speed up the whole research process. And especially with the academic articles, or the academic generative AI tools, the sources are cited. This is something that some tools are getting better at. Sometimes ChatGPT will tell you where it's getting the source from, but not always. So if a source is cited, that can speed up the research process as well. And you can check the accuracy a lot more quickly than having to kind of double verify and research what the AI is telling you. Cons, in a similar vein, is that accuracy and results may vary. Some questions that really great at. Other ones, it could hallucinate, could make up the content, which we'll talk about in a moment. It can be a very important thing to catch, and if you don't, can have real-world consequences depending on how you're using the AI. There's also a bias towards Western viewpoints. ChatGPT has been trained on mostly English text. That's the language it does best with. Other Western languages, French, Spanish does pretty well with, can do some translations as well. But really, English and Western viewpoints are the material that it was kind of trained on and learned. So that's the biases that it keeps. Additionally, if there's harmful or negative biases in the information that it's been trained on, those can carry over to its answers. As an example of this inherent bias that can be found in these programs, this is an image we got from Copilot after asking the prompt a successful person, and to create an image of a successful person. These images were individual prompts. That means it didn't give us these three pictures all at once. We asked it 3 separate times, and this is what it gave us. You'll notice they're eerily similar. The yellow seems to suggest that a successful person is going to be young, male, working in an urban environment in this tall office building with lots of windows. Now, likely we know plenty of people who are successful and don't fit this very specific image. So you can see here, this is where maybe the cultural idea or the representation media of success might be basically swaying or impacting what the artificial intelligence, what programs like Copilot are kind of giving you. Because they only can work with basically what they're given. And since they are being trained on literature, on popular culture, on media, stereotypes that can be found in those sources will just be carried over to the results and the prompts and what they create for you. So something to keep in mind that as you're using these, there can be these biases, there can be these negative portrayals that potentially get sort of mixed into what it writes and what it creates for you. Additionally, under the cons is a lack of transparency in how results are compiled. Towards the beginning of this program, we showed you how there's a kind of statistical analysis going on how it chooses which word to add next, does it over and over again until it's created, the sentences, the paragraphs, and so on. But how it's determining those aren't really known, and oftentimes these programs are referred to as a black box. So the programmers know kind of how they initially set them up, they know the material that they were trained on, but they don't entirely know how they're choosing to answer or how they're interacting with that material they've trained on when they're picking from one source or another, or how it chooses to do that. That lack of transparency is definitely a problem, and hopefully something that becomes more understood and is made more available to the public. Another con is hallucinations. So these programs are basically trained to answer your question no matter what. Now, to ChatGPT's credit, it's gotten a lot better about this. Now, it will usually tell you if it can't answer something. So it will still kind of answer your question in the sense it'll still reply to you. But previously, especially when these were first introduced, there's a tendency to just make up an answer if it didn't know something. And that can still occur now. Even though it's improving, it doesn't mean the problem's gone entirely. And so that's why verifying the information it gives you is incredibly important. Can't stress enough how important it is to be, you want to keep the human element in. These are tools, so it's something like a hammer, something in your toolkit that you can use to strengthen your writing, to come up with ideas. But at the end of the day, you have to keep the human in here, and it should be your job to verify the information that's giving you, or to add your own creativity or personality into whatever it's helping you write. One of the most well-known, I think still probably the best example of hallucinations and how important it is to make sure you're verifying the information, uh, comes from June of 2023, where a legal team was looking for the perfect precedent to help them win their case. After hearing that ChatGPT could be helpful, they started prompting it to find this previous case that could help them win. ChatGPT seemed to find that perfect fit and match everything they could have dreamed of. It was the perfect precedent. Unfortunately, it didn't exist. Even though ChatGPT had provided all the information needed to find this case, the legal team did verify the information and submitted it as part of the paperwork. When the opposing legal team and judge went to look for this miracle case, learn more about it, they realized that it didn't exist and was completely fabricated. Although AI models are constantly improving, you always want to make sure you do your due diligence. At a conference I attended, someone described AI as something you should treat like a friendly stranger. So if you ask someone in a new town you're visiting or vacationing in, where would you recommend to eat? And they gave you a name of a restaurant, you might look at the menu. You might check its hours. Verify that information in some way. So if nothing else, that's one of the things I want to stress the most, that especially if you're using something like ChatGPT for research, definitely make sure you're doing your due diligence and verifying the information that it's telling you. Now that we're nearing the end of the program, I always think it's fun to look at some AI-generated images. At the moment, although it is quickly improving, it hasn't gotten to the point where it's too difficult to usually tell when something is AI generated. There's a certain sheen to it, and you get some, I think, oftentimes hilarious mistakes or just weird inclusions. So for this, we're going to be comparing Copilot and ChatGPT, both creating an image based on the prompt. Can you generate an image of seasonal summer pies with signs indicating what kind of pies they are? Just take a moment, see if you can find some inaccuracies in this image. I don't think it'll be too hard. These two slides in general, though, are a good reason, or show a good reason why it's good to compare these programs, depending on what type of task you're doing. Some might be better at image generation, some might be better at helping you write a resume, or looking for an AI program that's really tailored to what you're doing. There's a lot of research-focused ones that'll help you with research way better than, say, ChatGPT or these kind of broader text-generated or generative AI programs. So definitely experiment and really see which program is going to be best for the task that you're trying to do. All right, now we've given it a moment, let's see what we can find wrong with this, aside from some really terrible lattice work on the top of these pies. Well, it's clear that Copilot does not do a good job adding text into an image. You see pie with 3 eyes, a peach sign next to a peach, not even a pie, and in the back there's a sign on a bowl, which is just a nonsense word. Additionally, the pies themselves seem to all be just blueberry and strawberries. And there's one that looks like just strawberries and blueberries thrown into a bowl. So not getting an A+ from me, and probably not really usable for much of anything here with this image. You could potentially continue to refine it, maybe ask for changes, give it some clarification. and maybe get something more usable. But at the moment, with this prompt, Copilot did not do a great job. All right, let's go over and see how ChatGPT is done. All right, take a moment. Similar, see if you can spot anything strange about this picture. You can see similar themes. We've got peaches, we've got strawberries, we've got blueberries. So it seems like that's a universally accepted summer pie indicator. And it's already clear that ChatGPT has done much better with the actual words in these images. There's no really egregious misspellings. Although the sign that says summer pie doesn't really answer the prompt. So it does get some marks off with that. Well, there does seem to be a greater variety of pies depicted here. That's good. It's not just all blueberry, strawberry. But the only sign that indicates the kind of pie says fresh strawberry pie. If you look more closely, we might notice that the strawberry and blueberry pie in the front has a strange perspective. Not all the strawberries seem to be facing the same direction. Furthermore, on the bottom right of the image, there's a pink pie that doesn't seem to resemble any kind of fruit pie. No idea what that's supposed to be. And then we can see half a grapefruit on the right side of the image, but in fact, grapefruits are not in season during the summer. One inconsistency that doesn't have to do with fruit or pie is that the tablecloth appears to be a variation on lace. On the right side of the image, you can see it morphs into a patternless and borderless tablecloth. After analyzing both of these images, you can see how both AI tools have their own merit and can generate images that at a glance might look good. However, like with text responses, it's always a good idea to think about whether that output actually makes sense and is something that you could actually use. Would working with AI to create an image like this be much better than using a photograph? Something you'd have to decide, but at least currently, with the inconsistencies that occur, the use for this is certainly debatable. So throughout this program, we talked a lot about ChatGPT, and I've mentioned Copilot and Gemini as well, because these three programs are very similar. The kind of bread and butter of text-based generative AI tools. In fact, I think Copilot and Gemini were, at least one of them maybe was built on or in partnership with OpenAI. So you're going to see similarities when you use these. They're going to have a text box. Largely the responses you're going to get are going to be text-based. They're large language models. So very similar and pretty well covered. But I want to highlight some additional AI tools. Specifically Be My AI, I think is a really interesting accessibility tool. So you can find it in app stores. What it does is it allows you to take a photo and then the AI can interpret details from that photo. So if you have a vision impairment and you're trying to read a label at a grocery store or describe the layout of a room, it can help with that. And that's one of the things I think AI could be really helpful for, is being able to interpret images or add subtitles, maybe translation. So it hasn't quite gotten there yet, but it is something that a lot of apps are pursuing and working on. So I think for accessibility features, that'll be something to pay attention to, and could be an area where AI is a tremendous help. Grammarly, which if you've written a paper for college or school in the past, like 10 or plus years, you might have had some interaction with. It would read through papers, help show grammatical errors. They factored in AI to help improve writing, to catch more mistakes, added maybe some suggestions. But this does come with, I think, a paywall for some of the features. Some of them are free, some of them you have to buy or add on a subscription. And then CamFind works similar to Google Lens, another alternative that helps you search using images. But really, as I've talked about throughout this, AI has been added to almost everything now. You see it in academic databases like JSTOR and EBSCO's products. You see it in social media, Meta, YouTube, and Google searches. So it's definitely ingrained in more apps, and you're going to see more and more startups try to kind of push AI to mixed results. I mean, Apple's AI so far hasn't really blown anyone away. But this is also a technology that's rapidly improving. Something that makes, especially generative AI, different than a lot of technological advances we've seen is that it was almost released a little early, kind of in like a beta stage almost. So that's why you saw tons of hallucinations originally or limitations, some of which, and many of which we've talked about in this program, and some of which it has improved quite significantly on. So, as with these suggestions, really anything, something to keep in mind that is rapidly changing, and so you'll want to do some research for yourself to see, which generative AI might work best for you. So I suggest testing, you know, type in prompts, kind of like we did with the images, into Copilot, into ChatGPT, and see which one gives you results you like better or that you find easier to work with. I think experimenting with these can be really helpful. But I also want you to keep in mind that while a lot of these products are free right now, there's a chance that they may go private or more of a profit model later, kind of once they've got people hooked, or once they feel like they've gotten enough training data that they can then start just charging. So you see things like Netflix, where it starts at a cheaper cost and has been steadily rising. There's a chance that something like ChatGPT, which has a lot of free uses right now, might start to see those get limited or switch to a pay model in the future. So it's one of those things that's kind of an uncertainty, but could definitely change over time. So just something to be aware of as you start to use these tools and get comfortable with them. That things could change both for good, for improvement, but also that the kind of pay models might change as well. To sum up some of the things we've discussed today, AI is everywhere and can be really easy to use. However, at the end of the day, it is a tool and not a replacement for researching and understanding a topic, for critical thinking. And as we've seen, it can be great for certain tasks like summarizing results or collecting sources, but it has limitations in its use. The phrase, don't believe everything you see on the internet, rings true for AI as well. Basically, AI can get you started, or like the pit crew in this image, help you in the middle, but you've got to finish the race yourself. Thank you for watching our AI Basics program. If you're interested in more programs like this, information can be found at carnegielibrary.org. The Information Research Services programming can be attended virtually or in person, with registration links found on the Emit section of our website.